Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Zand, and I am the coach of your San Diego Hydras for the UNPL Season 6. This is our quick draft analysis. We're going to go over the Pokemon we picked, why we picked them. But before we get to that, I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on myself. So, I have been playing Draft League for over 10 years now. I have been in and out of this community for a very long time. I've got some championships, I've got some Smogon results. But at the end of the day, I'm a player like everybody else, and I love running weird Pokemon, but I also like some strong ones. My history with the UNPL. I played in Academy, I believe a season or two ago at this point, and I ended up coming in second place. I ended up being the runner-up in Academy. Came back a few months later, played in the Spring Fling, which was a low tier, and I came in second place there too. So it seems like every single time I play in the UNPL, I end up going second, which honestly, not bad. I'll take it. But if we can win it all this time, I would feel great. If we can't win it all, if we make playoffs, I'm feeling pretty good about it. So things about this season that are worth knowing real quick. We have 125 points to spend on our Pokemon. There were super high tiers, 24 and 22 point Pokemon. You can only get one of them, so kind of like one restricted per team. And we had 25 Terra points that made Pokemon cost more if you chose to make them a Terra Captain, but we'll get over all of that in just a second. I wanted to pick Magearna so badly, but I knew that it would be one of the first Pokemon to go. And when we got our draft order put out, I was shocked because I was number one. And so there were a lot of strong Pokemon. There was the Palkia Origin, there was Dialga Origin, there was Giratina, both forms. There was a lot of strong Pokemon, Spectrier, a lot of strong Pokemon in the top tier. But I had to go with Magearna. Magearna is a Pokemon I've wanted to play with for so long. I think it has some of the best, most flexible sets in the game. It is one of the most overtuned Pokemon of all time. This thing has very few weaknesses and very few things it can't do. And that's why I love this Pokemon so much. I think it matches up really well into a lot of the other top tier threats, a lot of those other restricted Pokemon. It can be more supportive with Assault Vest. It can run Volt Switch and pivot around. It gets spikes for hazards. It gets a ton of great ways to set up. And I think one of my favorite things about this Pokemon is the typing. I already have Steel locked in and Fairy locked in, and they don't really have too many weaknesses in common. And by that I mean it has no weaknesses that a typical Fairy type has, so that opens up things like Terra Captains later on to run Terra Fairy without overlapping any kind of weaknesses with my restricted Pokemon. So I'm super excited. Obviously, this was super expensive. It was a fifth of my budget immediately, but with the stats, the typing, the moves, everything about this Pokemon, I know it's going to do great things for me. So after that, I had to wait, I think, like 31 picks for it to get back to me, and then I get 2 in a row. So I was thinking, what could I do from here? I wanted a dragon. I wanted some speed. I wanted some kind of removal maybe in there. And so my first of 2 picks was Roaring Moon. I was super excited about Roaring Moon. I've never really used it before outside of like laddering, but I know that it's very strong. Obviously has some of the highest attack in the game, can run Choice Band, Choice Scarf, and can run Booster Energy. Those are usually the items you see on it. It does get Dragon Dance. It gets a ton of physical coverage that's pretty good, and usually it doesn't do a whole lot else, but you don't really need it to do a whole lot else. You just need a physical breaker, and I think this pairs up really well with Magearna. It gives me a fire resist, although it doesn't care to be burned that much. It gives me a lot of momentum to move around my team, and as we'll see as we're going, this may or may not be my fastest Pokemon, which might be one of the flaws of the team, but we'll get to that. This was fairly expensive. I think it was at like 16 points, so not super bad. But I wanted to round it out with something with removal. I wanted some more complementary typings. So the next Pokemon I went with was Quaquaval. This is the first of these 3 Pokemon that I've actually used in draft before. I've used Quaquaval at least twice, and I think it is absolutely one of the best starters of all time. Just the ability for it to run away with games with Aqua Step and Moxie alone, not to mention all of its coverage, all of its supporting moves, is just so good. Especially this early on, I think grabbing removal was pretty important for me. And this is one of two Pokemon that can really run away with games. Magearna gets natural special attack boosts when it gets knockouts. Quaquaval gets physical attack boosts when it gets knockouts. So I just think they play really well together. Quaquaval is a momentum machine. It gives me rapid spin. And it's got a few other tricks up its sleeve, things like Encore that I think people won't really expect. So I think it's going to do great things for us this season. So once again, we waited. We got to see a lot of really good Pokemon go between rounds 3 all the way back up to round 4 when it got back to me. And the next Pokemon I decided to lock down was Gliscor. So originally I did want Landorus T for the team, but I've used Landorus T so much this generation that I wanted to mix it up, and also it may or may not have been taken, so I didn't really have too much of a choice at this point. I can't really expect Landorus T to make it round 4 anyway, but I decided to go Gliscor. It's a little more defensive of an option, a little more locked in on its item, so a little less flexibility there. I guess I could run other items on it, but it loses a lot of its versatility when it doesn't have that really strong passive healing. It gives us a Toxic user, and this thing really just covers our own hazards really easily. It gets Stealth Rock, Spike, and Toxic Spike this generation. So super helpful, gives me a ground immunity to help out Magearna, and I think it's a really strong pivot into our other members, especially if we don't give it a lot of speed. It can be a good slow pivot to get our setup sweepers in. At this point, I'm looking at the Terra Captains, and I'm looking at my team. I have 3 strong physical attackers, and then I have Magearna as my only special attacker. And I kind of wanted to play with a off-meta Terra Captain, and I think I should have saved this pick for later. I don't think anybody else would have taken it, but my pick 5 ended up being Armarouge. I had so much fun with Ceruledge in low tier. I thought Armarouge was surefire to be just as good. Since I've been looking at it, it has a few flaws that Ceruledge doesn't really have. First of all, Ghost type is just better than Psychic type, I'll be honest. And Armarouge's speed is actually considerably lower. I didn't really notice that until after drafting it. I kind of knew, but I was kind of just thinking it was base 85 too, but can't really do anything about that at this point. What I do think Armarouge offers me is a great way to scare people into thinking I could just set up and win, and if people don't respect this Pokemon, then I'm just gonna set up and win, especially with it being a Terra Captain. I can become things like Terra Grass, Terra Fairy, Terra whatever I want, Terra Fire, Terra Psychic even, to do crazy damage. And take a hit, get weak armor, get my speed through the moon, through the roof, over the moon, whatever, and just break through teams thanks to Armor Cannon and a lot of its strong coverage options. So I think Armarouge could have waited, because the other Terra Captain I wanted to pair with Armarouge was actually Jolteon. I wanted that base 130 speed. The ability to Calm Mind is nice, but just having that fast pivot and fast screens I thought looked really good on this team. I think screens look absolutely disgusting with what I have so far. Unfortunately, Jolteon did not make it back to us. That was our one and only snipe. Unfortunately, that snipe did set us back. We had a whole team plan. I ended up throwing out that entire team plan, starting from scratch once Jolteon went. So, next Pokemon that kind of landed on, Lycanroc Dusk. I think this Pokemon is another one similar to Armarouge that is super underrated in draft. I think a big part of that is because of that pure rock typing. I think it scares a lot of people off because pure rock typing looks really bad on that type sheet. I think it makes you feel bad because you have another fighting weakness, you have another ground weakness, you have a water weakness, a grass weakness, so you're building a lot of these weaknesses. But my team is not exactly hurting for weaknesses right now. So I thought it was okay to fit it on the team. And then something a lot of people forget about this Pokemon is it effectively gets a free life orb for all of its coverage for Play Rough, Psychic Fangs, Crunch, Trailblaze, Fire Fang, Thunder Fang. Maybe it gets Ice Fang. I'm pretty sure it does. Maybe it doesn't. I don't remember. But anyway, it has a ton of good physical moves. Close Combat. It gets Stealth Rock. And of course, Excel Rock. The rock move that both can't miss and is priority. So that looks so good into certain teams. I just couldn't really pass up how strong that fast rock coverage was. It also can act as a decent lead. I think it's really good at setting rocks. Maybe I think it can run Endeavor. It's not quite as fast as the midday Lycanroc, but it can perform that role if I just need rocks and then not worried about it after that. So I think Lycanroc is super underrated. It gives me some more immediate offense as opposed to setup offense. So I really like that. Not to say it can't set up, but it's probably less likely to. Next up, we have Ursaring. We had our new Terra Captain, and this is a J-Scarf recommendation. I will say a lot of this prep came from the kitchen, which is my elite team of builders, one of which is J-Scarf, who's super huge into Smogon Draft, one of the best to ever do it. Armor Rouge was a recommendation of Cham, another one of the best to ever do it, one of my favorite people to build with. I think these two Terra Captains are not Terra Captains I would have ever picked personally, but I'm so excited to try them out. So Ursaring, physical powerhouse, only ever holds 3 items. Holds EVL Light to make it incredibly bulky. It can hold a Toxic Orb to give it Quick Feet or Guts. Quick Feet gives it that speed boost, Guts makes Facade pretty much 2-hit KO everything that's not a ghost. And then Flame Orb is kind of like Toxic Orb, you expect to be in longer, and you still get those Guts boosted Facades. So I think this thing is so simple, but it's so impactful, and I think people are gonna underestimate it in the team builder. It was 10 points, so we ended up having 1 point left for our last Terra Captain if we choose to take one from a 1 point. I just think Ursaring is super strong because of all the coverage it has, because of all the things it can do. It can just set up in things face and not care at all, especially with Terra. We could Terra Fairy, we can Terra Ghost to be more defensive, or we could just Terra normal Facade, and who cares? You don't have a switch in unless you have a Ghost. So yeah, I'm super excited to use this thing. I think it's going to be hard a lot of weeks just picking which of the 2 Terra Captains we want to bring in a given week, because I think they both are universally very strong. Next up, we have a Sinistcha. Now, it's not a Zan draft if I don't have a Sinistcha somewhere. Unfortunately, this time we couldn't take Terra Sinistcha. It was 1 point too expensive, which is a little bit annoying to me. So Armor Rouge was 14, we had 11 left. Sinistcha was 12. So I was a little disappointed. I know it loses a lot of value when it can't Terrasilize, but I do think Sinistcha is just such a good Pokemon on its own. Pairs really well with Gliscor because Gliscor is setting a bunch of hazards. We don't want them to get removed. Sinistcha is one of the best spin blockers in the game. Pretty much all of the big rapid spinners lose to Sinistcha in a 1v1. So I think it's great for that. It's another strong setup option. We have Calm Mind. Of course, we have the Matcha Gotcha, the Shadow Balls. We can Iron Defense. We can Hex things. It's just useful beside all of kind of the limited move pool it has and all the weaknesses it has. I thought it fit this team a lot better. I do have an alternative backup if it doesn't work out, but I think Sinistcha is going to be great. I don't know that it'll show up every week, but at 7 points, you can't really argue with these stats and just all of the things Sinistcha brings to the table. Next up, round 9. This is when we were pretty much out of points. I was just trying to fill slots on the team. I really wanted screens. That's the idea behind Jolteon, was to have a reliable screen setter, but we lost that. So options were limited as we got lower down. We had things like Meowstic, some Psychic types. Prankster I always think is handy to have on a team. Prankster to help shut down things that are going to try to set up and sweep you that are really obvious that aren't Dark types. And I had the idea of Morgrem, which, 1 point, it's really hard to argue with because that's really cheap for screens, Thunder Wave, and Parting Shot. Ended up deciding against it. Sableye costed a little bit more, but I think it brings a lot more to the table because Sableye is another ghost, another spin blocker for us. It has those screens, but it also has things like Knockoff. It has things like Encore, Will-O-Wisp, Thunder Wave, and a lot of other options that I think could be super useful. It has an okay attack stat, so it can do damage if I really need it to. I don't think I'll need it to, but just in case, it may be able to do some damage for us at some point. But I just think it has so many handy tools for us to bring into some of these teams that really hard focus on setup, being able to Encore, stop their setup, burn them, paralyze them. They can't just pick one item to deal with me. Because with Morgrem, you could just run a Lumberry, or you could run a Clear Amulet and please stop my Parting Shots. Whereas with Sableye, you have to consider Mental Herb, you have to consider Lumberry, you have to think about it a little more. So even though Sableye is 3 points, I think it's hitting above its weight class. I think it's going to make setup with things like Magearna so much easier. And to round out the team, we had 6 points left. Pretty much the whole time people were taking their round 9, their round 10 picks. I was kind of set on Weezing. Weezing was a 6-point poison type, obviously has the neutralizing gas. But as I was looking at my team, I don't really need more physical bulk. I have a ton of natural physical bulk. I didn't really see much of a reason to bring neutralizing gas. And I didn't really care about Levitate because I wanted a poison type that was grounded. So I went with the other Gen 1 poison type. I went with Muck this season. Muck is kind of like Wheezing, but specially defensive instead of physically defensive. Other than that, it gets a little more in the way of coverage, but it loses some of the utility that Wheezing brings to the table. But there are some really good matchups for Muck this season. I haven't checked based on our schedules which things it matches up best against, but I know especially defensive grounded poison type can be really annoying for certain things to break. And so I think it's a decent way to round out the team, and it let me use that final Terra point. So at this point, we could pick 10 to 12 Pokemon. I could have been done here if I had taken Wheezing, but I have 2 extra points, and I want to use them to the best of their ability, even if these Pokemon never show up. So the first thing I thought of was Sticky Web. Normally, I think Sticky Web is overrated. I think it's unnecessary in draft, especially with heavy duty boots, but I think there's always room for it. And I actually think it stands out more in Ubers than it does outside of Ubers, because there are a lot more item locked Pokemon. Think about like the origin forms that aren't Giratina. There's other Pokemon that are item locked, the Ogerpon forms that aren't the Teal Mask. So I thought Sticky Web actually had a pretty decent place on the team. There were a handful of 1-point Sticky Webbers. There was Cricketune that I don't really care for. There was Cutie Fly that, decently fast and would have worked. But Jupiter actually has an okay matchup into, I think, 4 of the other 15 teams that drafted. And I will spoil and say there is at least one of those in our season this season. So I could see myself bringing Jupiter multiple times this season, which is hilarious. And on top of all that, it can Terrasilize because I had that 1 extra point. So if Ursaring and Armor Rouge don't look good for whatever reason, then I can Terra this into Ghost to prevent a Rapid Spin. I could do Terra Water. And the funny thing about it is, Araquanid in OU, as of right now, is doing great work with 50 base special attack, running max special attack Surf. Jupiter's not that much weaker, still gets Water Bubble, so it actually does respectable damage to things that are either weak or neutral to water. So it's not nearly as passive as the other Sticky Web setters. All that being said, I don't know why I'm spending so much time talking about Jupiter, because, it's a baby. It's not really doing that much for us. But I think Sticky Web on this team, if you saw all my speed stats, I think it could be absolutely massive, and it could really catch people off guard. And last up, I had 1 point left, and the best of the worst was Electric. There were like 2 or 3 reasons I picked this. 1, I like a slow pivot. I like having that, and it has U-turn, it has Volt Switch, it has knockoff, Super Fang, and Discharge. And that's pretty much all you're ever going to see on this guy. And that's fine with me. I think that's more than enough coverage to do whatever, if for whatever reason I decide to bring this. The other reason, the other championship I won, where I met everybody that is in the kitchen cooking with me and helping me build on a weekly basis. The first season I played in that league, I also won the season, and it was an Ubers league. And on my original team, I had an Electric. So call it whatever you want. I'm calling it a good luck charm. I think this little eel, even if it doesn't show up, it's cute to have in the team builders and to consider from time to time. And I just like it. I think it's adorable. Electros is like my favorite Gen 5 Pokemon, so I think it fits on the team decently well. And I could have used an electric type, so I thought it fit that pretty well as well. So yeah, that's our team going into week 1. Super excited to bring these games to you. I think the builds are going to be fun. I think our opponents are all super skilled. I'm so glad that I got to join UNPL main season this season. And I hope you all stick around, watch my games, give me some support in the comments. Let me know what you think. What did I do right? What did I do wrong? What could I change? I'm super excited to get into this season, and I will see you all next time.